Hello there.
Don't have a good day. Have a great day.
Talk to me, Goose.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
Why so serious?
World! I could do this all day.
Are you watching closely?
Welcome everybody to Testimony, the first project from One-Eyed Productions. My name is Seth Mossberg, and I wanted to give a little introduction to this audio drama before we started. Don't worry, it won't take too long. I grew up listening to Adventures in Odyssey, Paws and Tales, Jonathan Park, all those audio dramas that were basically movies for your ears. You could listen to them in the car with your parents, play with Lego while listening, and use your imagination to bring what you hear to life. It's such a versatile and unique storytelling medium, and having those series play such pivotal roles in my childhood always inspired me to want to make one of my own. I've been sitting on the concept for the story for over a year now, and I figure now is the perfect time to bring it to fruition, just in time for Easter. I will warn any young listeners, this is not completely kid-friendly. Our goal was to make a mature story that isn't toned down for the sake of censorship. I wanted to present the story as real as possible, so I would encourage anyone under 13 to listen with caution. We have plans to produce more of these types of audio dramas in the future, so consider this episode sort of a pilot to see how it's received. We're very excited to finally share this with you. A lot of work went into this from a number of different people. So without any further ado, I present to you Testimony. I don't know how you want me to start this.
Just tell us your name and your story.
Okay. I'm Jacob. I'm from Jerusalem, and I was a zealot, a rebel. The Romans here in Jerusalem, they made Israel a province about 30 years ago. Suffice it to say, most Jews were not too thrilled with that. As God's chosen people, they wanted independence from any oppression from pagan foreigners like Romans. And the people reacted differently. Some were apathetic. As long as they could afford a roof over their heads and food to eat, who were they to complain? Most people voiced their opinion to each other, but stayed quiet when the closest centurion walked past. But there were a few of us who were very radical. We were the militia of Israel, ready to fight every last Roman to the death if need be.
Zealots.
Yeah, exactly, zealots. Believing that God was our rightful ruler, as it was meant to be in the days of Moses. And yet, we would express it in our own way. We didn't really have the greatest self-control. Even when it wasn't directed against Romans, our actions were often questionable. Get away from me! We were not the most moral of men. As much as we claimed to do the work of God, our actions spoke way louder than our words. Our reputation among the Jews became very poor, and rightfully so. We were angry, self-righteous criminals. Nothing stood in the way of what we wanted. No Jew, no Roman, no Pharisee, no priest. If we wanted it, we took it. I regret a lot of what I did from that time. I was a very different man back then. Often each altercation with the Romans would end up with many of us in prison or dead at the hands of a Roman and his blade. And that's really where my story begins. My team and I were planning an insurrection on a Roman garrison to storm the building, kill the soldiers, take their supplies. But almost right away, everything went south. Who would have thought that soldiers who have trained all their life to eliminate any sign of uprising would stop us so quickly in our tracks? Out of the 50 men who stormed the garrison, only 9 got out alive. 38 were killed and 3 were arrested, myself included. I had managed to kill at least one of their head officers, among others. So I knew at any moment the guard could have drawn a sword and ended me right there, no questions asked. But as it goes, we got our fair trial. Now, there's no such thing as a fair trial in the Roman court. If they want you dead, they'll make sure of that. And that's not to say my sentence wasn't fair. I totally expected and deserved the death penalty, and that's just what they gave me. The death by crucifixion. Me and my 2 friends put to death by the very government we wanted to destroy. How ironic. The crucifixion day was set to be a week after the trial, just after Passover. At least I had the dignity to wait for us to finish our holiday. I had a while to think about what I'd done. Did I have any remorse? No. I was proud of what I'd done. I knew my sacrifice and the sacrifice of those 38 who died would inspire more people to join our cause and one day overthrow Rome. I was still able to talk with my friends Yusuf and Benjamin, who were jailed in the neighboring cells next to me.
It's for the greater good, you know?
Yusuf shared my sentiment, proud to be a zealot, To him and to me, even this loss was a win for our cause. Benjamin didn't say much. We would ask him how he felt, and wouldn't get much of a response. Once in a while we'd get a grunt out of him, but he obviously wasn't quite on our side.
Don't you think, Benjamin? Benjamin?
Yeah.
On the evening of the 6th day, I lay down for my last sleep on Earth, knowing tomorrow would be the day. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, I woke up to guards' armor shuffling down the prison corridor. It was clearly still night, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be executed until midday. The noise turned out to be 3 Romans, 2 soldiers and the jailer. They reached my cell, and the jailer opened the door. The soldiers marched in and grabbed me by the shoulders. If there was any sleepiness left in me, this jolt of adrenaline kicked it straight out of my body. They attached shackles to my wrists and ankles before basically throwing me down the hallway in front of all the cells. Benjamin and Yusuf had woken up at this point, and I saw their faces pressing against the prison bars in confusion as the guards picked me up and dragged me around the corner. I was quickly able to find my footing, though it was hard to walk with a chain connecting my feet. The Romans led me up a number of stairs through a very well-to-do part of the building. The people working there, presumably servants, glared at me as I was led past them. They were obviously well aware of my reputation as well. The guards led me through a door onto the balcony and into the open air. The smell of Jerusalem welcomed me, as did the crowd below, though not as courteous as the fresh air. By the torchlight I could make out 2 men already standing on the balcony, one of them bound. The unbound one I eventually recognized as Pontius Pilate, the man Caesar sent to Jerusalem to establish Roman power and to keep everything under control. In other words, my worst enemy. The man who made sure Rome's presence was known in the city and the biggest stone in my sandal. As the guard stood me just out of reach of this man, he looked at me. I stared him dead in the eye and spat on his shoe. He didn't even flinch. He was definitely expecting that. I couldn't see the other man. It was still very early in the morning, so the courtyard below us was lit by torches, creating inconsistent light on any face I tried to focus on. As I tried to figure out who this man was, Pilate spoke to the crowd below. Now, I have to give credit where credit is due. This man, as much as I despised him, had a voice like none other. I'm sure that was his Roman upbringing, but his voice boomed throughout the courtyard, and he said,
"Which one do you want me to release to you? Jacob, son of Abbas? Or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?"
At that moment, everything clicked. I was being considered for the annual prisoner release. It had been a tradition of Pilate's for a number of years now, sort of as a peace offering between him and the Jews. Often they would pick a man unjustly arrested and spare him from death or imprisonment. And I had heard of this man Jesus. People wouldn't stop talking about him for over the past 3 years. I got pretty sick of hearing about him. Just nonstop, Jesus this, Jesus that. But no matter what opinions I had about him, I knew this. He was a lot better man than I. Now that's not saying much considering what I had done, but if Pilate was letting the people decide between a well-respected rabbi and me, well, is that even a choice? Moments later, the crowd began shouting their response.
Free the son of Abbas!
Release Jacob! Give us Jacob, Barabbas!
And I'm not gonna lie, I like that idea. Hearing people who have hated you all your life suddenly cheering for your release is a great feeling. I started laughing, almost victoriously, even though I hadn't done anything. Then, in his booming voice, Pilate asked the crowd,
"Then what shall I do with Jesus, the Messiah?"
And the answer was almost in unison.
Crucify him! Crucify him!
The crowd was getting rowdy. Pilate was trying to speak, but he was drowned out by the crowd below. I was standing right next to the man, and the only words I could barely make out were something along the lines of,
"Why? What has he done that is deserving of death?"
or something like that. I was very confused in the moment. Up until this point, I assumed that Jesus had done something equally as terrible as I had, that I was unaware of, but Pilate was at the point of the trial, a trial, I might add, that should not have been happening this early in the morning, where he was condemning a man to die. But he had just admitted that he didn't know what Jesus had done that was wrong. I barely had time to process this before I was whisked away by the guards and led to the front door. One of the guards opened the door, while the other grabbed his keyring and unlocked my shackles. He pushed me onto the street and shut the massive door behind me. It was so jarring going from a loud courtyard of angry men to almost dead silence. I didn't know what to do with myself. There had just been so much going on at once, I couldn't process it all. It almost felt like a practical joke, as though at any moment more guards would rush me and bring me back to the prison. So I started walking. I didn't know where I was walking. I was just walking. The sun was starting to peek over the buildings of the city. There was still no one out and about yet. The workday didn't start for another 3 hours. I walked around the street for what seemed like forever, but it was only about an hour according to sunrise. The streets were starting to bustle with people, looking satisfied after an evening of feasting with their families. I was still so dazed and tired that the looks that people gave me didn't register for a while. The looks of disgust and hate, but also confusion as to why Jacob the Zealot was walking the streets so early, looking so vulnerable and confused myself. Apparently multiple hours had passed because the sun was already overhead when I remembered Yusuf and Benjamin. Had they been released too? Or were they... In the moment, I couldn't even think about it. I snapped out of my daze and ran as fast as I could across the city to the hill where the Romans crucified their victims. Probably because of the hill's ironic resemblance to a skull. I'd never run faster in my life. As I approached the hill, I saw 3 crosses silhouetted against the sky. I knew it was too late. My pace slowed as the terrain started to incline, and I reached the top of the hill and dropped to my knees a few cubits from the crosses. I looked up and saw Yusuf on the right and Benjamin on the left. Their bodies were covered in blood, dripping from their wrists where the soldiers had driven the nails. Their pale faces showed just how much blood they had lost. Gasping for even a breath of air, Yusuf pushed up on the nails in his feet, enough to breathe in a bloody breath before his legs gave out, and his weight fell back onto his wrists. No, I'm not an emotional man. You can't be a caring man when you fight the Romans as I did. Seeing these men I fought alongside being tortured and hung by their wrists as they slowly bled out, it didn't bother me. In fact, if the circumstances were different, I would have been proud for them to die with honor. But the moment I looked at Jesus, hanging on the middle cross, I couldn't hold back the tears. Compared to my friends, Jesus looked 70 times worse. His skin was marred to the point where I could see his muscles and internal organs. Welts covered the skin that wasn't torn to bits from the lashings. His beard and hair were caked with dried blood. He wore no clothes and twisted mess of thorns on his head. As I looked at him, I could only think of one thing. This man was literally hanging on the cross meant for me. I was prepared to die today on that very cross with those very nails that secured him so gruesomely to that cross. I deserved to die with my friends. I should have been the one up there. I was the one who had to pay for my sins. I knew this even from a young age. One of the first things you learn from Torah is that our sin has condemned us, even since our first father Adam. It has condemned us to death, and only through death can it be paid. And as I looked up at the man that I had heard so much about, the man that I had heard could do no wrong, the man that I had seen with my very eyes do miracles, I realized the weight of what happened. If not for the man Jesus, I would be hanging on that cross, bleeding out and dying as a consequence for my transgressions against Rome, against my people, and against God. Instead, he suffered for my sake in order that I might be free. To my surprise, Yusuf spoke up.
So I hear you're the Messiah.
Jesus, weak as he was, barely lifted his head to look at Yusuf.
Prove it.
Yusuf spat, blood mixing with his saliva.
Get yourself off this cross. And the 2 of us too. If you're as high and mighty as you say you are. Why don't you go tell God to go and do something about it?
Shut up, Yosef. Don't you get it? We deserve this. We sinned against God. There's no escaping the consequences of that. This man has done nothing wrong. He shouldn't even be up here. I regret what I've done. More than just my convicted crimes. Everything. Jesus, if what they say is true, and I know it is, will you remember me when you enter your kingdom?
Jesus looked at Benjamin and smiled.
I assure you, Benjamin, today you will be with me in paradise.
Benjamin managed a weak smile, and a tear trickled down his face. Then Jesus looked at me. This was the first time I had been able to look at his entire face, not under a flickering torch, but under broad daylight. And yet there wasn't much to look at. His eye had swollen, he was missing teeth, and his face had gashes and bruises on it. Even so, he gave me this look that I still cannot explain. He looked at me with such love. Not a kind of caring way a wife looks at her husband or the way a child adores his father. This look emanated this unexplainable, inconceivable love. When he looked at me, I understood that nothing I could ever do, nothing I could think, nothing that I could say could tarnish the love this man had for me. This man, this human sacrifice, literally paying my debt for me, looked me in the eyes and said,
Jacob, I love you. You are my child. You strayed for a while, but now it's time to come home. My kingdom is waiting, but it's up to you to decide.
That was all I could take. All the emotion flowed through me like the Jordan River. I knew, in this moment, that Jesus of Nazareth was more than just a rabbi. He was the Messiah, and I would be a fool not to believe him. You know the rest of the story. The sky darkened, but not by clouds. The sun was nowhere to be seen. It was many hours later when Jesus finally died.
It is finished.
Soon after, they came and broke Yusuf and Benjamin's legs so they would die quicker. I watched a woman, presumably Jesus' mother, caress his body after they'd taken it off the cross. I hadn't moved since Jesus spoke to me. Now that it was all over, I just began thinking. How could all of the evil things I had done, the danger I had put others in, the sins against others that I had committed, every selfish and evil thought that I had in all my years on this earth, how could they all be covered by Jesus' death in my place? The only reasonable conclusion I could come up with is to accept that all I had heard about him was true. This man was the Son of God, the Messiah, who came to earth to give us eternal life. And he died not only for me, but for anyone who believes in him and accepts his forgiveness. And if anyone hears my story and gets anything out of it, it's that you are loved. Inexplicably, unbelievably, unconditionally, incredibly, and faithfully loved by the God who created you. You may be 1,000 steps away from God in this moment, but it only takes one step to come back to his loving and forgiving embrace. It's up to you. Choose to follow him and accept his gift of forgiveness, and your life will be changed forever. Thank you so much for listening to Testimony. Please let us know what you think by joining our Discord, follow all our socials, and share this with your friends. Jacob is played by Seth Mossberg, Interviewer played by Trevor Tornell, Woman played by Grace Johnson, Yusuf played by Justin Robinson, Benjamin played by Alex Magnuson, Pilot played by Jeff Cueva, Jesus played by Nathaniel Boyer. Music is composed by Jordan Olson, and artwork by Sterling Dahlstrom. Written, directed, edited, and produced by Seth Mossberg. Testimony is a creation of One-Eyed Productions and Mooseberg Productions.
Thank you for sharing. Your story will be so encouraging to the church.
No problem, Paul. Thank you for letting me talk about this. God bless.